Hi, and welcome back to another video feature of the Immersive Worlds Handbook. I recently just returned from a trip to Germany, and I had a chance to travel all over, actually take in Nuremberg, go to Frankfurt. I was at a conference in Bonn, and then I took a little diversion north of Bonn to an area, Erkrath, where there's a very interesting museum called the Neanderthal Museum. And I actually have an entire video dedicated taking you through that space, so be sure to check that one out. But this particular video, I actually want to focus on what I'm calling Neanderthal tourism. So what was interesting was when I was at the Neanderthal Museum, I picked up this prehistoric Homo skull. So this is a hominin, an early human, and specifically this is a Neanderthal. And the idea is you open this thing up, and this is for kids, of course. There's a little brush and a chisel, and you can take this substance here and you can basically dig out the skull. I don't think we'll do that on video right now, but one example of some of the interesting stuff you find at the Neanderthal Museum, and the entire gift shop is just full of stuff like this. So kind of cool, and exemplifies, I think, what we're talking about here when we're talking about using the historic significance of this area, the Neander Valley, where the first Neanderthal was discovered. And I actually take you to that site outside the museum in that other video I mentioned. But when I was staying in this area, I picked up this brochure, and I thought it was kind of interesting because the entire brochure is basically using place branding in a way that I haven't seen before. So the one side of the brochure has this map, and this map features many of the sites and attractions that you would get to see, including in this area, including the Neanderthal Museum, but many other spaces and activities as well. And if you go to this part of Germany, it's very amazing, you know, walking through nature. When I went to the Neanderthal Museum, I was like a couple miles away from it, from the closest hotel I could find, and I walked through the forest and saw, you know, just some of the amazing flora and fauna that likely our early human ancestors saw so long ago in the past. But as I explored the town a little bit more, walking back on my very long day visiting the Neanderthal Museum, I started to see some other things that I thought were quite curious in terms of some of the use of the Neanderthal as a form of theming. And I'm trying to see here if we have some information. I guess this is the one in German, but in any case, it talks about some of the sites that you could see. So if you flip over the map, it has, again, examples of what things you could see that kind of tie in with this Neanderthal place branding. Now, it was kind of interesting as well. So I was going back close to my hotel, and I'll put this up now. I saw this image of a Neanderthal themed, a couple of these, two of these, a cafe, and the other one here, I'm trying to remember in post-production, I'll put it up here, but both of these had the Neanderthal as part of their theming. And then the third example was this Neanderthal taxi, which I thought was kind of interesting. Now, for those of you that haven't studied anthropology, you know, perhaps there's a perception that Neanderthals were dumb and brutish and unsophisticated. If you take an archaeology class or a biophysical anthro class, I think this is blown out of the water, this particular myth. So I would say it's actually not that ironic maybe to see a taxi using Neanderthal theming, but I think if you weren't familiar with this misperception about Neanderthals, you might think, oh, well, that's bad theming or place branding because basically, you know, Neanderthals weren't all that smart. I think a lot of that is being revised, and in no small part by some of the work at the Neanderthal Museum, where they really do try to put in perspective early human ancestors of ours and give us analogies and comparisons that I think are quite effective in terms of offering us a new interpretation of our early human ancestors. The other interesting thing is I was at a theme park conference in Bonn, Germany, as I mentioned in a couple of these recent videos. And I mentioned to one of the Germans who was there, I said, this is such a strange use of place branding and theming, both at the museum and in this valley where there were these mini sites, some of which I've shown to you here. And she seemed kind of surprised and said, well, why? You know, why wouldn't that work in the States? And I said, it's just not something that I think Americans would be interested in at this level. I mean, on the one hand, you have to really be interested in early human history in that side of science. And on the other hand, at a second level, you have to get very specific, because this museum is not just a hominin or early human museum. It's very specific to Neanderthals. So that form of specificity, as I mentioned in my second video on the Neanderthal Museum itself, I think is a challenge maybe in terms of using this as an attraction draw for guests. But I think it's amazing that they're doing this, because it's so unique and so different in terms of the museum itself. Beyond that, in this entire region, using this as a form of place branding, I think is very smart, because that connection with nature of Neanderthals, the flora, the fauna that you experience when you visit and take in some of the sites that are on this map, I think are very attractive to people who enjoy nature. And certainly Germany does a lot of place branding using nature itself. This makes it a little more specific and historic and significant to us in that evolutionary sense. So I wanted to offer this video to you today, because I think it's a great example of using place branding and theming in some ways that are interesting, unique, but all the while iconic in terms of their application. So please come back for additional video features of the Immersive World's Handbook.